Hello everyone, it's Turin here with another Warhammer Total War online commentary. In this particular battle, I'll be playing the Greenskins. And this is actually a 2v2 game, so I am playing the Greenskins as well as my teammate Bart Fitzgerald over here, who we decided to divvy up the army compositions a little bit. He's actually going to be playing the Urks or the Orcs, and I am playing the Goblins. So my entire army is lads and gobos, and his entire army is Greenskins as well as some giants and kind of other miscellaneous big-in type units. So very, very cool. So we are facing off against a Dwarf and Empire opponent, so definitely thematically a very cool matchup and something you might see in the Warhammer universe. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this. So let's go ahead and go over the army composition real quick. I have some Goblin Wolf Riders as well as 2 Goblin Big Bosses to round out my lad army here. And he also has 2 groups of Orc Warboy Biggins. So this is kind of our mobile cav force. It's a nice little synergy because the Goblin Wolf Rider is very good at harassing with 94 speed against the 62 of the Orc Warboy Biggins. These guys are very good at getting around enemy cav units, flanking, and just in general very good at being annoying. So huge fan of these guys. In my front line, I have Night Goblin, just Night Goblins. So not Night Goblin Archers, just these. This is my infantry corps, guys. Just these lads. So hopefully they'll pay their dues. And they're also mixed in with some standard goblins because I didn't have quite enough money to get all Night Goblins, although I would have liked to because the poison is quite strong against not necessarily against the dwarves, but against Empire, like great swords and other low tier infantry, it can really lower their stats to a point where they're very combat ineffective. I have some goblin archers back here, and then of course a goblin great shaman who I have to be very careful of not losing because he's such a squishy lord. Definitely very weak to getting dove by Empire captains, and of course Karl Franz over here is definitely licking his chops right here, seeing this goblin big boss. So, and then on top of all of that, I have I believe 3 of these Doomdiver catapults, which are just going to be excellent in this matchup. So very, very fun stuff. And I think 2 Arachnarok Spiders. For my ally's army composition, he has a backline of Black Orcs and then Biggins, so a very traditional army in regards to, a competitive Orc composition. The only thing that's a little out of meta, perhaps, is the Giant. But again, Giants are very, very cool, and in multiplayer, just such a fun unit. But you definitely have to be careful about not getting shot down and focused by Quarrelers and other units like that. So as far as his wizardry goes, he has an Orc Shaman, and I think he has an Orc Big Boss over here on a Wyvern. So thankfully, I do have a lot of missile troops as well as the Doomdiver, so I should be able to cover him against Karl Franz. And he is rocking a Potion of Foolhardiness, so very, very good pick on my ally's part, and then also a Potion of Toughness, so he is ready to party, guys. So as far as our opponent's army goes, fairly standard Empire army. He has a front line of kind of spearmen and halberdiers mixed in here. He has some crossbowmen, and then of course in the back he has greatswords who will be waiting for the Black Orc. So definitely a good deployment here. These units all have charge defense in some capacity, so if, for example, he did have Cav or a Giant coming in, these guys will absorb that charge pretty well, and then the greatswords can follow up and deal with the Black Orcs. But Biggins are such beasts. They have 42 weapon strength. They absolutely tear through frontline low-tier infantry, so it's definitely going to be a good situation for the Biggins, to say the least. On top of that, he has Karl Franz and a Bright Wizard. So Lore of Fire, it looks like he brought most of the ability, so Lore of Fire is great. And against Greenskin infantry, you really need something to kind of close the gap of strength, because Greenskin infantry with the Wah and the Big Wah are just such a force to be reckoned with. So definitely the Bright Wizard is a welcome addition. The Dwarf player has a cannon here. He also has a cannon here. He has a mixture of Quarrelers in the back line, some Thunders, Hammerers, Miners, and then in the front line, it looks like he mostly has Longbeards with great weapons. So definitely a wise pick in terms of the traditional meta, because most Greenskin players against Dwarves are just going to stack like 30 Black Orcs. Like literally the entire landscape will be Black Orcs, because they're just such a good unit in terms of how much you're paying for them. And Hammers can hang with Black Orcs and usually beat them one-on-one, but they're also a little more expensive, so something to consider there, guys. But unfortunately for him, I just have a ton of lads who, the armor-piercing great weapons, they're designed to take big, low-density units down, but against lads, they're not going to be the best. So, and also it looks like, I don't know if he brought Slayers to deal with their Arachnox, but the cannons are going to be quite good, and of course missile troops are pretty good at dealing with them as well. So without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and get started. This should be a fun one. Definitely a big fan of this map. I like the open field, just kind of straight to business vibe. So my Goblin Wolf Riders and big bosses are kind of running around the flank here, and you can see my Vanguarded unit is actually getting a pretty decent little position behind my opponent's forces. The Greenskin, or let's go ahead and just call them the Urks and the Gobos, just for reference's sake here. The Urks are advancing on the main line here on the Empire opponent, and the Goblins are also advancing on the Dwarves. So we're definitely going to have a very traditional head-to-head army composition. Something that's very good, though, against the Dwarves in a 2 versus 2 setting is you can see the Dwarves usually tend to sit back while the Empire will advance. If I had simply turned my focus here and just put a few kind of distraction units here to block off the Dwarves, I think we could have overpowered the Empire player very quickly, but unfortunately I didn't have that foresight. But still, things are going pretty well. Bart is using his Orc Boar Boys to kind of sit back here and protect our back line, but Karl Franz surprisingly does land, which is a very dangerous proposition. So all my Night Goblins are shooting at him, and he is poisoned now. You can see his speed is 69, and he's taking serious damage. And of course, Bart's Orc Warboss comes in, and the Arachnarok Spiders come in, but Carl took a beating for sure. And the Orc Warboss, though he probably would lose in a straight up traditional duel, he does have the potion where Carl does not, and all these goblins are also shooting him. So Carl did take a lot of damage. In the front line, the goblins in the back have kind of gotten through and got a nice little charge on these thunders. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to show you. And these Night Goblin Wolf Riders are were able to outmaneuver the defending dwarves and are going to get a great little engagement on these Coilers back here. So you can see they're gonna get run down. And man, I cannot speak enough about the effectiveness of the Goblin Wolf Riders. Just such a good unit for 300 resources. I mean, look at the damage they've done to these Coilers. And anytime you can deal with these missile troops that are very, very good at supporting the dwarven front line, you're going to get some good value out of that. So over here on the Greenskin or Urk side of things, the Black Orcs and other troops have engaged in the front line, and you can see the different buffs. The Sneaky Stabbin', I was able to buff them, and then also on top of that, his Orc Shaman is doing a really good job buffing these guys. So this front line of Empire troops is just going to get cut to pieces by these big ones. The reserve greatswords are kind of waiting and probably to see where the Black Orcs are going, but Bard also was able to penetrate with his giant and these Orc boars to penetrate this weak flank, and the greatswords are not going to fare well against these units. And though these are shock infantry, not shock infantry, but shock cav, in their true nature, they're going to do pretty well with their armor piercing. And then of course the giant is doing, going to lay the beat down, but the opponent wisely did pull in some halberdiers who are going to be pretty cost effective here. Also, he does have some crossbowmen in the back, but they are relatively vulnerable and have been taking missile fire for quite some time. So over on the lad side of things, you can see the lads have engaged here, and also they're supported by the Arachnarok Spider, which is definitely going to be very tough. The Longbeards with great weapons are going to take an eternity to cut through the goblins, and that really allows this Arachnarok Spider to kind of just have free range and just tear through these troops, because not only does it have armor piercing, but 150 armor is just so much to be reckoned with. But the opponent does have Iron Drakes over here, but Iron Drakes, like their tooltip suggests, are very weak against armor, so they're really not going to do much. Although I suppose this Arachnarok Spider is shaken, because if I'm not mistaken, the flame attacks do cause a pretty substantial hit to leadership. So over here, this second Arachnarok Spider is doing pretty well, but it is a little bit more surrounded by hammers and other units, and it does break, unfortunately. But the Night Goblins in here are doing a pretty good job, and of course the High King is putting up a fight, but he is taking a bit of missile fire, but thankfully he is quite resilient. So yeah, definitely a tough engagement for the lads over here, but they're doing their best. This Arachnarok Spider is holding it down pretty well, and one of the big things that I do have going for me on the lad front is that the Goblin Wolf Riders are just riding through and perpetually trolling, so definitely can't complain about that situation. Over here, the Greenskins, the Black Orcs, and the Biggins have just absolutely torn this Empire army to shreds. He had a lot of low-tier infantry in the front line, and just the mixture of Biggins and Black Orcs is just so much to handle. Unfortunately, the Orc Warboss does take a beating from Carl, and Carl is having to pursue and chase him down, but yeah, it looks like he is wavering, so yeah, it's a very tough situation. But the Goblin Archers are doing a pretty good job, and you can see all the Doom Divers are actually targeting Carl right now, so he's just taking this massive barrage of Doom Diver fire, and he's pretty low himself. So again, if this Warboss can just continue to run and kite him while these Doom Divers fire, and thankfully the accuracy of them pays off so much in this situation, they're going to make a lot of contact, whereas Rock Lobbers would not have a chance in hell of hitting Carl Franz at a side strafing angle like this. So definitely something to consider there. The Night Goblins here are just continuing to put up a great fight. I mean, the Thorgrim is here, and he is getting the Itchy Nuisance to lower the stats of these hammers, but hammers and miners and those armor-piercing units like greatswords are inherently designed to take on Black Orcs and heavily armored troops that come in smaller numbers. So against fodder units like Night Goblins or traditional Goblins, they're not going to do that well in taking them out. It's going to take them forever and not be the most cost-effective situation. And you can see the Goblin Archers have kind of gotten a nice little pocket here. They're just continuing to rain down on these guys and just slowly pick them off. So definitely things are going well, and you can see some of the Goblins are coming back from routing. But as soon as they come back in, the High King just punishes them. He's going to be great because these guys don't have any armor, and Thorgrim has 450 weapon strength, so definitely a force to be reckoned with. But the Goblin Wolf Riders in the back continuing to harass, and the Goblin Big Bosses, they've just been holding it down. I mean, that potion, he's actually wavering despite the fact that he's at full life. So leadership is definitely an issue with these guys, but the main thing is kind of just to hold them off and distract them, and then also protect the Warboss against Carl Franz. But you can see Carl's actually chasing that Warboss into the great eternities over there, so that's definitely a tough situation. But the Arachnarok Spider does come back from rout, and thankfully it's able to kind of get on this cannon, because the cannon with its anti-large and armor piercing will do really good at taking him down. But fortunately, the gyrocopters and all these units are just focusing it, and it's a tough situation for our spidery friend over there. But the Goblin Big Boss just continuing to occupy this entire force here. Over here, Bart's Giant is doing a pretty good job beating these guys down, and Giants are pretty good against these guys. The weapons, 530 weapon strength, and they're not heavily armored, so the armor piercing of the traditional Longbeards isn't going to be that good against it, so that's definitely a nice situation. But one thing that will be really good against it is these Iron Drakes. So if he's able to get these Iron Drakes like turned around and back online, shooting at this Giant, that's going to be really, really tough for us. Over here, you can see the front line engagement is still continuing to happen. You know, the Goblin Archers are just kiting them, but, you know, most of these, not Greenskin, but Dwarf units are pretty worn down through the attrition. And you can see the Goblin Great Shaman just lurking here, kind of trying to find a sweet spot to get in. And also, those Doom Divers are still online. And that's a long march for him to send any troops after it. So if those Doom Divers are able to just continue shooting at these hammers, you can see they're doing devastating damage. And, you know, eventually I think the Dwarf player is going to get worn out. On that same note, the Black Orcs and other troops that were dealing with the Empire, and though the Empire does have some stuff kind of residually hanging around, for the most part, he was wiped out. So, you know, these Greenskin infantry, once they do arrive and do battle with the Dwarf infantry, it should be all she wrote at that point. But again, there's still, you know, several minutes left in the game, and a lot of the lad army is going down. You can see this Arachnarok Spider is indeed shattered over here. But there are, you know, pockets of GOBO resistance. There's some Night Goblins, some Goblin Archers coming back, and this Goblin Great Shaman is definitely thrown down right now, but he does not want to be here. As far as leadership goes, he's a very weak leader in terms of just combat, but he does have the support of his Night Goblin Archers here, who are going to tear these miners and other troops to pieces. And the Dwarves also already have a problem with being kited around, but when they're also poisoned and slowed in that respect, it's just going to be that much harder. So definitely a good situation for the lads over here. This Giant continuing to fight despite the fact that it's like at like 5% of its HP, and now finally the Biggins are getting here. The big boys are back in town, and there are some Greatswords and Empire troops in the mix, but for the most part, if you guys take a look, the Dwarf player's army is mostly broken or shattered, and it does have a few pockets of resistance with these Thunders, and I believe, yeah, the Gyrocopter actually probably ran out of ammunition and had to land, but the Biggins will do a pretty good job taking it down. Let's go ahead and see if we can find High King Thorgrim. So he is over here doing battle with this Spider. Definitely important to get that off the battlefield, as the Spider is quite a huge threat. But for the most part, he doesn't have the support. Most of his other troops have been worn down by the attrition of these Night Goblins and Goblin Archers who, you know, they'll constantly rout, but they can come back and start, you know, doing some work. And you can see these Night Goblins are going to get in here and do battle, and he's just taking so much arrow fire to the face. And you can see even the Goblin Great Shaman gets in there and gets down and dirty, uses sneaky stabbing to give these guys melee attack and some armor piercing. And then of course you can see Bart's Orc Shaman coming in to get in on that action. So High King Thorgrim here is shaken. Probably not much longer for this battle, but you know, he's still putting up a great fight, and I have to be careful because this Goblin Great Shaman is very, very low. So I definitely don't want him to rout off, because goblins are very susceptible to leadership hits. So if your lord flees or dies, like, that's very, very bad for the rest of your army. But you can see the High King Thorgrim here is routed off. The rest of the Greenskin troops definitely came to help out in that pinch there. But for the most part, you know, the steam tank has collapsed. And let's go ahead and take a look. So Karl Franz is still alive. There's also a Bright Wizard up here, but yeah, that's one of the downsides with Karl in these big battles is there's so many variables that can do damage to him. So not having those potions is certainly a big liability. And you can see he's actually wavering from army losses, and he is now broken. So it looks like that's all she wrote, and the Greenskin, the GOBO, and Urk Alliance was able to prevail on this day, guys. So hopefully you enjoyed that game. So we'll go ahead and take a look. You can see the Goblin Big Bosses and the Wolf Riders. I mean, they didn't rack up a ton of kills, but you can see in the back line, they applied some great pressure, kind of disrupted the ranks. And the Night Goblins, they were fighting pretty high-tier Dwarf infantry, so they're not going to rack up a ton of kills against Longbeards, but they did, you know, a good enough job. The Arachnarok Spiders were kind of the backbone of my front line. They also took a beating, but, you know, did a decent job, so can't complain. But, you know, as always, the Doom Divers are just so good. Targeting hammers, targeting Karl Franz, as you guys saw. A lot of funny business going on. So we'll go ahead and take a look at Bart's army. You can see, I mean, God, these guys just absolutely slaughtered that Empire front line. I mean, the Empire, you know, Spearmen got 6 kills before they got crushed against these Biggins. And also that combination of the Orc Shaman with the Big Wah. And then I was also buffing his front line with the sneaky stabbing. It was just so much for that Empire player to handle. So the steam tank, I didn't really get any good views of it, but the Orc Boarboy Biggins with their armor piercing and anti-large were really able to dumpster that thing. So very well played there. As far as the Empire player, his army goes, Karl Franz was definitely scary. He was chasing, you know, did good damage to my Arachnarok Spider early on, was able to kind of pressure, not Arachnarok Spider, but the Orc Warboss, excuse me, was able to pressure a lot of other units, but at the end of the day, not having the potions and all of that missile pressure was a lot for him to handle. The Great Swords, obviously, very good unit, can't complain there. And let's go ahead and take a look at the Dwarf player. So he had a ton of armor piercing, and unfortunately for him, I didn't really have a lot of armored units. You can see mostly just lads, and I suppose they did well against their Arachnarok Spiders, though, because they do have 150 armor. So you really need that armor piercing there. The Quarlers did okay, you know, but most of the lads are shielded. So Quarrelers aren't going to do that much work. Quarrelers are more designed to take out big ends and those type of things, but against the lads, it's a really ineffective, use of them. But unfortunately, how can you know that going into the game? So the Iron Drakes were very cool. Definitely had some leadership hits on the Giant, but at the end of the day, it's more of a flashy unit, and I really think Iron Drakes need some buffs because they're just not a good unit. But again, with this new patch coming out, the new DLC, it'll be interesting to see the Regiments of Renown version. I'm really excited to see them in action. But the cannons were also quite a threat. They did a ton of damage. And you can see both of my Ragnarok Spiders took a beating this game. So really good game to our opponents, Sneezeek and Alter Vision. I look forward to seeing you two again in another 2v2 team game. And I hope you guys enjoyed that the Greenskin and GOBO horde there. Have an excellent night and take care.